Hello, everybody. This is Juan Lee again with Oliver, and we're back talking about life. It's life.
It's like,
Um, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. I am good. It's life. It's a great title. And it's all inclusive, right? That means saying that to someone means different things to different people, right? When you say it's life. And that I love that because no matter where you fall on the spectrum of how those two words resonate with you, you're in the right place, no matter where you
Yeah.
fall on the spectrum.
Yeah. And that's a very good, interesting thing you say that because, we oftentimes qualify that as being good or bad,
Exactly.
something good or something bad, but it's life encompasses both.
That's right.
It encompasses both, and the moment will dictate it for each and every one of us how we perceive it.
Indeed. Indeed. So that's why it's special. So for all that are listening, welcome. You're in the right place. No matter how that resonates with you, you're right. And and
Absolutely.
and there's a piece of how you feel that I'm sure you will find in all of our conversations.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, today, Alva, I was thinking, in light of a little bit of what we're talking about, it's we're gonna discuss and dig into um life is hard without directions. When we
Mm,
don't have any directions,
hmm
life if nothing else, it will appear to be extremely difficult because I think back on my time as a teenager graduating from high school,
hmm
and I felt hopeless. Um, I didn't feel like I was prepared for life,
hmm
and I was looking for directions. I grew up from in my dad and my stepmom at that point, um, in the suburbs. Um, but I was unprepared for life, man. I would never forget. My mom she wanted me to my stepmom, which my mom, she wanted me to go to culinary school because I liked to cook.
Okay.
You got to understand, but in the 80s,
hmm
that probably wasn't the most masculine thing to do is want to be a cook, you
hmm
know, to be a chef, so to speak. But I was just, I just didn't see that for myself.
hmm
Um, and I didn't know where to go, didn't know how to maneuver, didn't know where to turn from that perspective. And I was seeking directions in a way that I didn't even know that I was looking for them because my academic experience up until that point was horrible. I was terrible in school. And so my identity was shaken at best um, when I graduated from high school. And so I didn't know where to go. And lo and behold, I got into the Air Force, got into the military, and they gave me directions. And those directions gave me a perspective on not only the military experience, but life in general. And, I just think back on the fact of if I had not had those directions, that direction,
hmm
where would I be?
Yeah.
Because up until that point, I was struggling without some directions.
Yeah. And that's you see that played out so often, right? In so many people's lives. Like there's so many of us that are winging it. And I often tell guys that I work with or couples that I work with that you can't wing it. Like there needs to be some sort of plan. There needs to be some sort of directions. Now, sometimes the pushback that I get is that there are individuals who are winging it and they're doing well, and that's great, right? I can't can't dismiss that. But then the analogy that I give is like many of us and many of you who are listening are probably familiar with the store IKEA. And you know, with IKEA, you go in and you look at everything. Everything's nicely set up in the showroom, but when you purchase something, you actually have to put that thing together when you get it home. And based on if you're a visual person, you can look at it and be like, all right, I'm gonna wing it. I'm gonna put this thing together. And you might do it, but it may take a little bit longer. And I'll give you a real world example. I'm guilty of doing that in the past. And I get halfway through and realize, man, this panel was actually supposed to go on the left and I put it on the right. So now I got to take the whole right side apart again. so so that I could take this one panel and put it over on the left, right? And that's fine. I still got the thing up. Had I looked at the directions, however, I would have known that on the front end. And that might have saved me a little bit of experience. And so that's what I tell the couples. I'm like, yeah, you know, maybe you can wing it and be okay, but at the expense of what?
That's the key word. That's the key word. I think I think we probably touched on this a little bit in the last episode where we were talking about faking it until you're making it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're winging it, that's probably a good indication as to how you're doing it. You're faking it until you make it.
Right.
Now, you can the problem is that that's a hard thing to maintain.
Yes, it is.
It's a hard thing to maintain. And when you winging it, the biggest deficit or the biggest problem with winging it is that you cannot share it.
Mm. Talk about that.
You can't share it. See, the concepts are things that you learn and you implement them appropriately, but the concepts never change. But
Mm-hmm.
when you
Okay.
faking it, you just stumbling over the concepts, not even knowing that it's a concept.
Mm.
You just stumbling over it. See, there's a reason why there's instructions that give you those steps by steps how to get there, but you can trip and fall down the steps
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and fall and end up at the bottom of the steps.
Right.
But if you know how to succinctly go down and take every step, gaining all of the value that each step has, you can end up at the bottom of the step standing up.
Wow, that's good.
Instead of at the
Instead of
bottom
on
of the
your
steps
face.
on your face, you're
Right.
still at the bottom of the stairs, but you're on your face.
Right.
And then that's going to affect the fact now, how you going to explain that to somebody how you got there?
Mm. Right.
And again, if you connect this with our last episode talking about, service, as we realizing that the things that we've developed ourselves into is to serve others with, and then we talk about and we connect that to a legacy, then we're talking about how we got there,
Mm-hmm.
how we got to serve where we are serving so that somebody might be able to understand that investment so that they can build on it.
I like it.
So they can build on it. So
That's
yeah,
the beauty of
it's
directions.
yeah, it's the beauty of directions. It's being able to pass them on if you can establish them, because in many cases we are having to establish. I mean, we are originals. We're having to blaze our own course, but at
Mm.
the same time, we want to be able to share that course.
Yeah.
If we have children, we have people, we have nephews, we have people that we want to give that information to. It's one thing if we got a bunch of money and we burning it, but if we thinking about those that are behind us, we finding a way to preserve that.
Right.
And that's the process of, you don't just trip and fall and go like, "Ooh, I got $1 million." No, how did you get that $1 million? Because if you got it, if you don't know how to maintain it, you're quickly gonna lose it.
Yeah.
You know,
And Yeah, and many of us kind of, I know I'll speak for like my younger days, just had uh this attitude of like, I know what I'm doing. Like, you can't tell me, or your way, your directions that you're providing to me are outdated, or that's not how we do things now. And many of us, if we're being honest, because I'm gonna be honest, learned the hard way that I probably should have paid some attention. And here's the thing, I'll play devil's advocate. It's it could be it could be 100% valid that some of those directions did not apply. But instead of taking the directions and maybe tweaking a thing here and there, but still following the general consensus of what was given, that would have worked. That would have even worked better for me than dismissing all of the directions altogether. And then you end
Hmm.
up learning stuff the hard way, right? And so many of us have said, man, I learned that the hard way. And yeah, maybe there's some significance to that. And yes, maybe you can pull something out of that to be inspirational and motivational to someone else. But you also, like you said, need to have something to pass along. So even if from a motivational standpoint, I tell you my story and I talk about how life was hard, I still need to leave you as a result of the lessons that I've learned through that hardship with a set of directions.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's like I didn't have it, but here you go.
here you go. Right.
It's that legacy that you're gonna look. I've gone through this. Now, in light of what you were saying, it was just talking about it's irrelevant, so to speak. That instruction don't work these days, so
Hmm.
to speak. I, Here's the thing that I would push back on that. It's the concepts that don't change.
Okay.
Your path might, but the concepts don't change. It's for the like, if you want water, for instance, let's use um hot water in your house.
Hmm.
The fact is water coming in your house, getting to your bathtub or to your sink, that ain't changed.
Hmm.
How it gets there might change. How that water gets hot versus the way it used to get hot. But the end result of it is the water getting to your bathtub. And the understanding is that we want to transfer the water from this one place to another place. How it gets there is irrelevant. And it almost goes back to what we were talking about. We realize the need, and how we get there is our originality, it's our uniqueness.
Hmm.
It's that are unique. How you get That's the invention. That's the creativeness of who we are as intelligent beings. Is that okay? Think of a new way to do it. Make it yours.
Make it
Okay.
yours. There it
It,
is.
it it's not to be emulated. It's just to be understood, the concepts, and then you create it. You make
Right.
it your own. That's
Right.
where that's where our originality comes in. And when we don't have that kind of instructions or directions, all we have is the concept. If we learn that, let's gather the concept, let's learn the concept, let's not follow the leader in the sense of how they did it, but
Hmm.
why was it that they were doing, what was it that they did. It's the questions that those situations should involve or in cause us to think about, that
Hmm.
makes it our own.
Yeah.
And then we'll be able to build on that and carry it to the next generation, because ultimately this experience that we're on, I think this is something that we're eventually going to get to and talk about, but it's a temporary experience.
Hmm.
And it's while we're here, we're going to pass something on to the next generation. And by doing that, we've got to identify it for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some responsibility that we have as well. I'm just thinking back from a generational standpoint, some of this we kind of I'm going to admit it, kind of brought on ourselves, right? And as it relates to how individuals respond to directions, because if you think about it, there was a period, there was a generation who they were forced to follow directions. They didn't have a choice. They were forced
Yeah.
to follow directions. And then on the heels of that generation, uh, came another generation who took the tradition of those directions and used that to forge their lives.
Rebellious, so to speak.
Right. And then that pattern kind of took, took on a life of its own. And I
Hmm.
can think about like my parents' generation. So my parents' generation, they were part of they were that generation that took the directions, they lived under directions that they had to follow. And then they took those directions and they crafted the ideologies and directions that they had us follow. We felt like that was too restrictive for us. And we were like, man, so we did the exact opposite with our kids, where they were directionless. Or some of us, before we even had kids, went through this. You got to pull your own self up. So I used a certain particular set of directions and I got to this point. You got to figure it out. So I'm not handing you the directions. I'm going to give you a couple little concepts. Here's the end result, but I'm not going to tell you how I got the end result. You got to figure that out. And so the directions kind of began to fizzle out and we're start winging it now. Once we get it, now we're like, I got it. And it took me a long time to get it. It was hard to get. I'm not about to just hand this to you because
Wow.
it was hard for me to get. So I'm not about to just give it to you. And then now that creates this generation of winging it because we don't know. Right. So I'm saying all that to say we got to get back to, and you talk about love in your book, right? We got to get back to to the point where we can love the folks around us in a way that causes us to do exactly what you just said, pass things down and pass down processes and directions. And here's how I did it. Make it your own if need be, but it's going to save you some of the hardships of life because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about life being hard without directions. So if I can help you bypass some of the hardships of life by giving you this blueprint, then I should be willing to do that no matter how I acquired that blueprint.
Hmm.
No matter how tough it was for me to create that blueprint, because I care about humanity, I'm going to give you this blueprint. Now you tweak it. If you don't want the door here, that's fine, but you need a door. That's the point of this blueprint is that the door does need to be in here somewhere. If you want to move it 5 inches to the left, then that's fine. You create what you need to create, but it will allow you to it'll mitigate the chances of you experiencing some of the hardships of life that come without those directions.
Man, you're absolutely right. That is, man, that really rolls us back into understanding what it is that we're doing. This really rolls back into our previous episode, to understand who we are,
Mm-hmm.
um, to be able to understand that those instructions are important to the big picture.
Yeah.
And when we're attempting to go through this life, um, and we don't have any instructions, it's essential for us to get some perspective of understanding if we have to create these instructions for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
we've got to get some perspective as relates to what's the end goal.
Right.
What's the end goal for this perspective? And I think you touched upon it last episode when you were talking about that perspective. You either get it either takes you in one or two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
You either go, a positive way or a negative way, or good or bad. But I think if we understand what the objective is,
Mm-hmm.
then it helps us determine which way we're going to proceed. And that's the thing that we have to consciously be aware of. Is this the perspective that I'm looking at these instructions on or from, or are they beneficial to humanity? Are they beneficial to add value
Mm-hmm.
to this experience, or is it motivated by selfishness?
Mm-hmm.
Is it selfishly motivated? That's because selfish things only last temporarily.
Right.
Now, unless we're using, like, for instance, when we are growing and we're developing, that's a myth. That's a way of being selfish, because I'm engaging, I'm digesting these things for myself, so that my purpose is it so that I can give it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that regard, yeah, I'm going to do it. But for just to have it for the sake of having it, it does us no good. It does us no good just to have something.
Agreed.
You can't gain anything else unless it's connected. And so when you give, you're able to receive a little bit more, because you have availability, you have access, you have opening, so that you can give. One of the things that I never forget, one of the things our pastor told us long years ago, and he was like, if you got your hands full, you can't receive anything else
Right.
until you give.
You got to make space.
You got to make space. So everything that you're given is so that you can give it, so that you can continue the process of gaining and growing and learning, so that you can give and some more. And the thing about it is that it's like grow. It's building block. It builds us. We get better, mature. We get more wisdom or knowledge, and it's built upon. You can't drop calculus on just learning your numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process. You build up on it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of things that we have to realize, that this knowledge, these guides are taking us somewhere. And we've got to determine where we want that. Is it beneficial? Because everything that's out here, everybody trying to give you something, trying to direct you in a way that might not be to your benefit.
Right.
Um, and
Uh,
just another thing that you were talking about when you was talking about directions. And I think back when I was in school, when the teachers was trying to give me directions, and I was being defiant and was being disobedient and just being everything. I was frustrated.
yeah.
I don't know. I didn't, and I told you I had a learning disability. So it was that type of thing that, as the teachers was teaching, I had to find some way of being able to eliminate the struggle or the frustration. And I did it in any way I knew how.
Mm-hmm.
And being troublemaker, telling jokes, not paying attention. It was just ways to avoid trying to learn. And that's something that I've found out a lot of times. We have issues and things that we're dealing with that we try to avoid learning, or try to avoid those instructions, because we're trying to cover something up.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want people to know we can't get that. So instead of saying I don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
we'll fake it.
Right. And I think some of that, that thinking about that, it just makes me think we have a responsibility to change the narrative, because there's some folk who will not look for directions because they don't want you to know that they need them.
Hmm.
And then there's some folk who are not willing to give directions like we talked about earlier, because it took them it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to craft that blueprint. So they don't just want to hand it to somebody for free. But we got to get to the point where we are looking at this completely different.
Mm,
So there's a responsibility on the person who lacks direction to seek it, right? I talk about it in my book, going through this process of observation, training, execution, and feedback. And that once you go through it, you should take somebody else through it.
mhm,
So if we have that from two sides of the coin, the person who's seeking direction and is like, man, this is I have a vision for where I believe my life should be. I believe I'm starting to figure out where I'm called to serve and all of these kinds of things. Now it's their responsibility to go seek those directions. So, to put it in a practical sense, if I want to become an author and I feel like, man, I have something to say, I have something to share with the world. Now it's my responsibility to go get around some authors and ask some questions and observe and do all these things that will allow me to leave that experience with a set of directions. So that's the responsibility on the person seeking directions. We also need to change the narrative for the person who has already got the directions.
mhm,
That no matter how you got them, no matter how hard it was to get them, your obligation, I'm going to use that word for shock
mhm.
value, your obligation is to be ready to share that. So now if we come about that from both sides of the coin, the person who has them is ready and willing to share and looking for the opportunity. The person who needs them is ready and willing to receive and looking for the opportunity. We change the game.
Absolutely. That's a absolute. I 100% agree with you in that scenario. I think those two perspectives prevent us as a society to being able to unify our existence, to be honest with you,
Hmm.
because we are so divided and we think that we need to do it ourselves,
Yep.
and there is nobody in existence in this earth that has accomplished anything by themselves.
Yep.
And it's the trick that we have, that concept in our mind that prevents us from being successful,
Hmm.
because we all need help. There's not an author, there's not anybody, a business owner that can be successful as a business owner that don't have a customer.
Hmm. Yep.
You need customers. You have to provide them with something that they have need of. And each and every one of us, as being humans, are operating as an independent business,
Hmm.
that we need to identify our service
Hmm.
and provide it to others.
Yep. Yeah, man. So life is hard without directions, but it doesn't have to be because there's directions out there.
It doesn't have to be. You're absolutely right. And that's the thing that I think for many of us, we just don't realize the significance of being able and willing to to glean and to accept. And I think we talked about this, the difference between gleaning and emulating.
Hmm.
You know, get the cause, find out how that person, what were the steps that they took. Don't try to make the steps, um don't try to follow that person. Find the steps that that person used,
Hmm.
because it might take you a little while to get to that step, but at least you know that step is necessary
Right.
to get to the place where you saw that person get to.
Right.
That step is necessary. You can't skip a step. We need that step.
We need that step. So you got
Yeah.
to give yourself some directions. You got to be willing to share the directions if you already have them. You got to be willing to seek the directions out if you don't.
Yeah.
And we can navigate this thing a little bit more successfully with directions. Again, listen, I hear you. Those of you who might be saying, "Hey, well, I've gotten to this point in my life so far, and I just kind of did my thing." Cool. But if you were honest about evaluating your progress up until this point, could you have avoided some things? Could you have shortened some times? Could you have heightened efficiency? On and on and on and on. If you had a blueprint, and I'm pretty sure, I'm willing to bet the few pennies that I have that the answer would be yes, I could have done that.
Yeah. I mean, in the area of business, they talk about coaches,
Hmm.
people that help you, basically flatten the curve.
Hmm.
It's about getting that instruction. And in life, we're all out here trying to figure it out ourselves. And life hasn't changed. It's the works the same last year as it did this year. And unfortunately, we don't recognize the simplicity of it. And thing about it is that we trying to make it into something that it's not. And guess what? Ask for help.
Ask for help. That's the lesson.
Ask for help. It's one of those things that we try to avoid, but
Yep,
it opens the door to things that we would have never understood or never or would have had to take the long way to get.
that's
So
good. That's a lesson for me. Ask for help. Ask for help.
I hear you. I hear you.
That's it. I think that's a beautiful for those of you who are listening. That's that's the nail in the coffin in terms of everything that we've talked about so far in this episode. Is that at some point there is some level of interaction that is going to need to take place, either for the person who's sharing the instructions or for the person who's seeking.
Yeah. And the thing about it is there's growth and learning on both sides.
Yep.
Growth and learning on both sides. Um, I think this is a good spot
I
to
love
call
it.
this episode a quit. Um, how can people get in touch with you, Oliver?
People can get in touch with me. People can get in touch with me. You can go to the website, Denali, DENOLI.org. You'll get information about me, author, speaker, coach in the relationship building and men's empowerment spaces. If you are a social media person and want to connect with me there, you can connect with me at Denali LLC, or you can look up my name, Oliver Marcelle, or you can email me, oliver@denali.org.
Well, cool. Dog, you just opened up all of the social media. You can, first of all, you can reach me at Juan Lee the author, and that's where juanleetheauthor.com is where I'm an author and a speaker also. And we can get in touch with me there. You can get in touch with me there. Also, if you're interested, I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called Clear Journey. You can just go to clearjourney.org, and you can reach me there. But at all costs, if you have any questions or concerns about the podcast here, it's life. You can also, just say that that's where you heard us, heard us at, and we'll get back to you. We're both willing to engage. So you all have a great time. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.